Okay, fantastic. Here I am again. I wish I didn't have to. Srivatsan would love to be here and would love to give this talk. Unfortunately, he fell sick this morning, and so I'm going to give you the talk. That said, yeah, all the slides, all the work, all the slides is Srivatsan's work, so I've just added his picture here. And this important disclosure again. Welcome back. So this talk is about studying the problem of security and throughput in blockchains. This is a problem that has been studied quite a bit in the past. The standard kind of picture or the standard numbers that everybody cites are from a few years ago. These numbers that Visa in peak processes something like 25,000 transactions per second, and in contrast, popular blockchains like Bitcoin can do at most like in the tens. And somehow people have the feeling that there's quite a gap between sort of the processing capacity that each node has, both in terms of like the network connectivity, but also the ability to kind of execute transactions. So processing sort of in the wider sense, right? And the transaction throughput that we actually achieve on chain, right? So there's a gap between these, and people have been trying to sort of close that gap. To increase block sizes, increase the throughput of the blockchain protocols. And other people have, called for caution and said, well, there's, some security margin here because of which the throughput is so much lower than the node's capacity. And, maybe we don't want to eat all the way into the security margin, right? And so, academics have sort of kind of entered this discussion and have in particular studied the security versus throughput trade-off as an example, for example, of Nakamoto's consensus protocol. Okay, and so it's in this line of works that also this work lies. Right? So we're studying security versus throughput in Nakamoto consensus, and Nakamoto consensus is sort of the Bitcoin protocol, but besides instantiating it with proof of work lotteries, it has also been instantiated with proof of stake lotteries such as the Ouroboros or the Snow White protocol. Okay, so we take this as an example to study these effects of security and throughput. And so if you go to the literature, sort of the main figure where people study this kind of relationship is when you plot what fraction of adversary work or adversary stake your protocol can tolerate as a function of the relative block production rate. So the rate at which blocks are produced normalized by the speed at which nodes in the network can process these blocks, right? If you look in the literature, you will find this curve, right? And this curve basically tells you that, roughly around the point where, you're producing blocks as fast as your nodes can process them, right? Your adversary resilience sort of starts tanking. And before that, you get a resilience of about 50%. Okay? So in particular, if you exceed the block production rate, if the adversary exceeds what the protocol can tolerate, then there is the well-known private attack to attack the protocol. And if the adversary is weaker than predicted by this bound, then the protocol is supposed to be secure. Okay. All this work takes place in what we call the bounded delay model. And what is that? That is, well, the key thing to analyze the security of this protocol is to sort of describe, how quickly can nodes actually process blocks that are being produced by other nodes. Okay? And in this bounded delay model, the idea is, here's my computer, and my computer receives, or any validator, any node, receives blocks, messages more generally from other computers, and the idea is any message that it receives, it can kind of process and communicate and execute and evaluate this message within a certain delay bound. Okay, for example, 1 second. Right. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, what if there's an adversary who has withheld a bunch of blocks and just suddenly dumps them all onto the network? Right? Then you would expect that, somehow now, there's a burst of work to be done. how long does it take me to kind of process that last block? Well, according to this model, still, every block, every message will be processed within 1 second. Right? That ignores, effects that we have in physical systems, which is congestion. Right? If there's bursty block production, or if the adversary dumps a bunch of blocks on the network suddenly, then you would expect that the time it takes to process the last one of those would actually go up. Right? So you would expect a system to behave much more like a queue. Right? Real systems have bounded processing capacity, and you can only process blocks one by one. And until you get to all of these blocks, they basically kind of queue up. And so the time it takes for these blocks to actually make it through your processing system should actually go up if the load on the network increases. Right? So now if we take this model and we kind of go back to the security analysis, then what we find is actually there are ways to exploit congestion in order to sort of make it so that even weaker adversaries can attack the system. And I'll show you one example. What this means concretely, if we instantiate, for example, with the bandwidth recommended and the block production rate for systems like Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, if the system is parameterized fairly conservatively, you don't see much of this effect. But in particular, a system that was sort of pushing to kind of operate close to kind of the processing capacity that each node has in terms of the throughput of the blockchain, will see a considerable drop in resilience. Okay, so the key takeaway here is, when you're designing and analyzing new protocols, keep in mind the fact, that your system has bounded capacity, and you need to somehow deal with this. Right? Then this is all in the setting of proof of work Nakamoto consensus. What we also provide is a kind of a new security region, kind of a region of block production rates for which we can characterize up to what adversary fraction the protocol is secure. And then we can go to proof of stake, right? If we're in this queuing model and we're in proof of stake, then besides these 2 points that allow the adversary to drive up congestion and to attack the system, there's a third point that is important, which is that in proof of stake, you could have equivocations, equivocating blocks. So if somebody is entitled to produce a block, they can actually produce a whole bunch of copies. And so the load on your system may actually be even higher than just the blocks that the protocol would produce normally. And then you would expect that these attacks become even worse, right? And in fact, that's the case. If you want to drive down the probability of attack to zero in an exponential fashion, then the only way you can do that is if your chain becomes slower and slower and slower. Okay. So the last result I'm going to talk a little bit about is how you can modify kind of proof of stake protocols to kind of recover this behavior of proof of work protocols that equivocations don't play a role. Okay, what you should notice is, right, in these new bounds there is quite a gap kind of between what the attack can do and what the security result does, unlike in the previous bounded delay model. So there's a lot of room for future work there. So now I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of these aspects. First, I want to talk a little bit about the bounded capacity model, right? How do we model this system? So, in the blockchain, we have blocks consisting of a header and content. There's metadata and there are transactions. And the way we model the processing of blocks, meaning both the communication but also the execution, everything that kind of goes into this delay, is that whenever a block is produced, the header sort of gets pushed out to the network. It then, at every validator where it receives, kind of enters a queue. The validator uses some protocol-specific scheduling policy among all the headers to decide, what to execute next or what to download next. In particular, we're looking at the process the longest header chain rule first. Process the longest header chain first rule, which is used, for example, in Bitcoin and in Cardano. And then based on the header that was chosen, the validator proceeds to download that block and to execute that block. And so, that's the whole propagation process. Okay. There's a header delay, that's part of the model. There's a processing delay that basically captures kind of the capacity constraint. How long does it take for each header to kind of process the body or the content. And then the thing that's new in this is, if we wanna talk about the end-to-end latency, we need to characterize the queuing delay that blocks have as they go through the queue here. Okay, and that arguably depends on the scheduling policy, and it depends on, for example, this behavior that the adversary may show of like driving up congestion, right? Withholding a bunch of blocks and then suddenly dropping a bunch of headers onto the network, kind of trying to congest our queue here so that honestly produced blocks will be delayed, and then that would undermine the security of the system. Okay, so I want to give you an example how such a congestion based, attack strategy could look like. It's just a, small toy example to give you a sense of how an adversary could use congestion in order to, try to weaken the security of the system. Right? So, for example, in Nakamoto's consensus protocol, we can say, okay, we have our genesis block. There's like an honest block here, and let's say the adversary has already. By chance, lucky for the adversary, has already produced 3 blocks, but it has withheld them. Okay, it hasn't shown them to the network yet. And now an honest miner produces a new block, disseminates this header to the network. The adversary suddenly drops all these headers onto the network. Okay, then because of the longest header chain first kind of scheduling rule. All the honest validators will now try to process the body for this adversary block here. Okay, so it'll take a while, then everybody has processed that block, right? And then they realize, oh, the content of the other blocks is actually not available for download, right? I've received the header, but I'm not able to actually find the content for this. Okay, fine, so I'm gonna abandon that chain for now. I cannot proceed here. And I'm gonna stop processing now finally start processing the content of this honest block, right? But in the meantime now, in order to download this one honest block, basically the adversary had to download the honest party had to download also an adversary block, and so it basically spent 2 blocks, it had to process 2 blocks in order to advance its longest downloaded chain by 1. Okay, and in the meantime, because that takes longer than just processing 1 block, honest miners have been mining on this most recent honest block, and so there's more forking, and that undermines the security of Nakamoto consensus. Right, so this leads to delay, and we're now basically, after this, we're basically back to square one in terms of this picture, right? So if there's another honest block, then again, the adversary releases another header, and it'll again take longer to download that, for honest parties to get to downloading that block than before in the non-queuing model. So that gives you this, bound here for this congestion-based attacks, and the key takeaway again is, congestion-based attacks succeed with lower adversary power, and so you should keep those in mind when you analyze protocols. In equivocation, so in proof of stake, so previously this was all for proof of work. Now if we look at proof of stake, right, then block production is done by this proof of stake lottery, where an adversary, whenever it gets to produce a block, could actually produce a whole bunch of blocks with different transactions. And it could send all of those to the network at the same time, and then this congestion-based attack becomes even more problematic in terms of security. How do we get a security proof? Let me check time, good. So we want to still prove security, say for proof of work, for Nakamoto consensus in this queuing model. What's important there is that we characterize the queuing delay and the processing delay. In particular, the queuing delay is kind of this new quantity that wasn't there in the bounded delay model. And so we need to characterize sort of any honest message, any honestly produced block. How long does it take for it to traverse this queue until it's processed so that honest miners can mine new blocks on top? And the naive approach to doing this, which we did in an earlier work, is to give a worst case bound on this queue length. Okay, so we look at kind of overall, over the whole execution, how bad could this possibly be? It could be pretty bad. And as a result, in order to get a protocol that is secure, we need to keep reducing kind of the block production rate of the protocol. But then there is a key insight, right, which is, okay, we have this worst case bound, but most of the time the system is not in the worst case, right? There should be some sort of an average case behavior, right? The queue cannot always be full. There's only a limited supply of blocks in proof of work, and they get processed, let's say twice or 3 times, like some number of times faster than they're produced. So it's not possible that the queue is like always congested, right? And so even if the adversary withholds a bunch of blocks on some side chains and it drops them on the network later, these blocks, they must be sort of old. And so we can, if we use the longest header chain first rule, then these old blocks that are from like, a long time ago, somewhere higher up in the block tree, they should not have very high priority and they should not be able to clog the network. So we do a refined proof where we basically analyze the system in this average case rather than in the worst case. And then what we obtain is security of this protocol, even at non-vanishing block rates. Okay, so that's the security result that you've seen before. This was all for proof of work, right? Except for this small detour that I did about the congestion-based attack. Now for proof of stake, this key insight that there's only a limited supply of blocks no longer holds. Right? That's only the case in proof of work. In proof of stake, there could be equivocations. And the idea to sort of work with that is, is there a way to just not process these equivocations? Right? Can we just if we know there was an equivocation, we know that whoever produced this block is malicious. So it should be somehow possible to just ignore that block. Right? The problem if we do that is we need to agree that we all will ignore this block. Right? If I decide to ignore it and Dionysus has maybe not seen this equivocation and decides to actually process that block, then we risk ending up in inconsistent state. Right? So the idea though is, okay, if I see an equivocation, at least, since the network has not that much delay, I can convince Dionysus that there was indeed an equivocation. And so as soon as somebody sees an equivocation, we should be able to convince each other that we should all all ignore that block, right? That's sort of the intuition. And the way we do this is as follows. So suppose there is an equivocation, right? Then there is some sort of a kind of a proof of equivocation, right? There's evidence. There's 2 signatures on 2 different blocks, right? By the same proposer at the same time. Then we can ignore the content of these blocks and use kind of the rest of the chain to include an equivocation proof for this equivocation. And then we, make sure that this way we all agree which block's contents we will blank, and this way we will recover consistent output logs. And if we do this, we go from this picture, which basically says there's no security unless you have vanishing block production rate, back to the picture that we have seen for proof of work, which is that even with non-vanishing block production rate, you still get security. Good. That basically concludes the talk. If you want more information, check out the paper. Here's the QR code. We have some simulations there of these congestion-based attacks. We describe this POS, proof of stake Nakamoto style protocol that overcomes equivocations. And you can read the security proof under bounded capacity in the full glory. This is work that will also be presented in October at CCS. And I want to leave you with like a final note, which is something that I'm excited about with this work is, there is this kind of hidden kind of part of the iceberg when it comes to consensus protocol, security analysis, right? Most consensus protocols are analyzed in pretty simplistic network models. And if you kind of, peel away a little bit at those layers, then what you will find is that there's a whole bunch of factors that are sort of not accounted for, right? Today we talked about bounded processing capacity. Other things are network topology, network level attacks, heterogeneity among the parties that are in the network, etc. So there is still a whole bunch of things to be done. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks a lot for a nice talk. So my question regards this assumption that the scheduling policy is based on the latest header. This seems really easily exploitable. I can just show you a header that I claim is very long, and you will process my blocks first. Is there another policy that would be preferred, or like have you ruled out everything else?
Good. You're asking specifically here about kind of the scheduling rule. Okay, so in the case of proof of work, what we do is, so you can't just make a claim, right, about where, about the height of your block, right? So in proof of work, we go by sort of the highest, we process the highest block first. And we're able to verify that, right? Because we see the whole header tree, so to speak. And so we just go to the longest chain in the header tree, and those are basically the blocks that we're supposed to process. In proof of work, there's a bunch of different rules. So if you look at the paper, we give the security proof assuming a handful of conditions on the scheduling policy under which we can then complete the security proof. And there's a few other sort of download rules or processing rules for which the security proof also works. In proof of work, I'm not sure they're so important. In proof of stake, there is more degrees of freedom because you have more information about when the block was produced, by who the block was produced. You could ignore equivocations, for example, or you could go by kind of the most recently produced block rather than the highest kind of block, all of those things.
All right, thank you.
What about the use of slashing in proof of stake to just punish equivocation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That to some extent is orthogonal to this question, right? So the idea behind slashing is that if it ever comes to a safety violation, you're going to be able to slash a third of the parties, right? Here, there could be a single person signing 2 blocks, and you already don't know what to do, right? If you just take away if you just slash them, you still need to decide what you're going to do with those blocks, right? Those blocks don't go away. You still need to somehow make sure that all honest parties are treating those blocks in the same way. So slashing, gives you some deterrence against this, but it doesn't change anything about the fundamental problem.
So on your plots, you have the green region and a red region. What about the white region?
Yes, the white region is left here intentional for academics to do more work. Yes, the point here is we don't know how to close this gap. So we're not sure whether there are attacks that exploit congestion that are better than the one that I've shown you, or whether there is an analysis that is better than the one you can find in the paper that basically improves this region, or plausibly maybe both. But yeah, the analysis we have and the attacks we have are not tight, and so it's not so clear what happens in between here.
Let's thank the speaker again.